Dawn was breaking over Doadarura airfield, and Technical Sergeant James McKenna knew someone was about to die. It was 7:42 in the morning. August 17th, 1943, New Guinea. McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning, his hands still black with grease from the night before, watching a young pilot he'd just saved, or condemned, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old. 6 combat missions under his belt. 0 kills. 0 chances of survival, if you asked anyone who mattered. The Japanese had dispatched 18 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters to intercept the morning patrol. Hayes was about to fly straight into a death trap, and McKenna had just done something that could get them both killed, something no mechanic was ever supposed to do. For 8 months, McKenna had maintained these beautiful, deadly machines. The P-38 Lightning, twin-engine fighter, twin-boom design, an absolute beast at high altitude. Fast as hell in a straight line, but cursed with one fatal flaw that was killing American boys every single day. It couldn't turn with a 0. The Japanese 0 was lighter, more agile. It could complete a full horizontal turn in half the time a P-38 needed. That difference, that precious handful of seconds, meant the difference between going home and never going home at all. American doctrine was crystal clear. Never turn with a 0, never try to outmaneuver them. Use your speed, use your altitude. Dive in hard, shoot fast. Climb out faster, hit and run. Don't get caught in a turning fight. Don't get caught. Hayes had tried following that doctrine 5 times already. It hadn't worked, not once. The Zeros were too smart, too experienced. They baited American pilots into turns, sliced inside their turning radius, got on their tails, and shot them down like clay pigeons at a county fair. The 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s in just 6 weeks. Most were shot down after being trapped in turning engagements they couldn't escape. Couldn't win. Couldn't survive. McKenna had watched too many pilots die. Good men. Kids, really. Boys who'd never kissed a girl, never held their own child, never lived long enough to matter. They climbed into their P-38s with confidence in the morning, and came back in wooden boxes by afternoon. If they came back at all. The training manual said the problem was pilot error. The instructor said these pilots weren't following doctrine properly. But McKenna knew better. The problem wasn't the pilots, it was the control cables. The P-38's aileron control cables ran through the twin booms to the tail section, then forward through a series of pulleys to the wing control surfaces. The cable system had slack. Not much, maybe 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. Barely noticeable. But that tiny bit of slack created a delay between stick movement and aileron response. At high speeds, cruising altitude, straight flight, it didn't matter. But at low speeds during hard-turning maneuvers, that fraction of a second delay was the difference between rolling inside a 0's turn and getting shot down, getting killed. McKenna had mentioned this to the engineering officer 2 months ago. The officer had looked at him like he'd suggested painting the aircraft pink. The cable tension was within specifications, he'd said. Factory tolerances allowed for that slack. Changing it would void the aircraft warranty, void the warranty, while boys were dying. Besides, no field mechanic had authorization to modify flight control systems. That required engineering approval from Lockheed, and Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California, sipping cocktails while American pilots burned, alive over the Pacific. So McKenna did something that violated every regulation. In the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual, he took a 6-inch piece of piano wire from a damaged aircraft, cut it carefully, bent it into a Z shape with his bare hands, and installed it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron control cable. The modification took 8 minutes. It added 0.4 tons of tension to the cable. It eliminated the slack completely. Nobody noticed. The inspection crew didn't check cable tension that morning. They were focused on engine oil levels and ammunition loads, the routine stuff. McKenna said nothing. He just watched Hayes taxi to the runway, watched him take off, watched the P-38 disappear into the morning sky toward 18 Japanese fighters who were waiting to kill him. What happened in the next 17 minutes would change how every P-38 in the Pacific theater flew. But first, let me tell you about the pilots McKenna had already lost. The first was Lieutenant David Chen, July 9th, 1943. Chen had been in theater for 3 weeks. McKenna had worked on his aircraft every single morning. They talked about California. Chen was from Sacramento. McKenna was from Long Beach. They'd both worked on cars before the war, back when the biggest problem in life was a stripped bolt or a seized engine. Chen took off at 0615 on a fighter sweep over Leh. He came back 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes stitched into his left boom, and a story about a zero that had gotten inside his turn. Chen said he tried to roll out and dive away, exactly like the manual commanded. But the airplane felt slow to respond, like there was a delay between when he moved the stick and when the aircraft actually rolled. The zero almost got him. The only thing that saved his life was his wingman shooting the zero off his tail at the last possible second. McKenna examined those bullet holes. They were grouped tight, perfect deflection shooting. The zero pilot had led Chen perfectly, had anticipated exactly where Chen's airplane would be. That shouldn't have been possible if Chen had rolled hard and dove immediately, unless the airplane had delayed just long enough for the zero to get the lead exactly right. Chen didn't fly again. His aircraft went back to the depot for repairs. McKenna never saw him again. 3 weeks later, he heard Chen had been killed flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. Same story. Caught in a turning fight. Couldn't roll out fast enough. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison. Morrison was a flight leader, experienced, 11 kills. He knew the P-38 inside and out, knew its limitations. Flew smart, flew careful. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison got 1 0 on the first pass. Came around for another run. 2 zeros reversed on him. McKenna heard the radio traffic afterward. Morrison tried to roll inverted and split S away. Tried to execute a perfect defensive maneuver. He called out that his controls felt mushy. The zeros stayed with him through the entire maneuver. Shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman said it looked like Morrison's airplane wasn't responding fast enough, like he was fighting the controls, fighting his own aircraft while the enemy was killing him. Morrison died in the crash. Morrison's crew chief was a friend of McKenna's, a guy named Rodriguez from Texas. Rodriguez was convinced something was wrong with Morrison's aircraft. He checked everything after they recovered the wreckage. Engine settings, control surface rigging, cable tensions. Everything was within spec. Nothing wrong with the airplane. The official report said pilot error. Rodriguez didn't believe it. Neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. Some he knew well. Most he'd only met briefly while doing pre-flight checks. But he'd worked on all their aircraft, had signed off their maintenance logs, had watched them taxi out, watched them take off. Some came back, some didn't. The ones who came back told the same story, over and over and over. The P-38 felt slow to respond in hard maneuvering, like there was a slight lag between control input and aircraft reaction. Most pilots thought that was just how the airplane handled. Heavy fighter, big control surfaces. Some delay was expected, right? But McKenna knew that wasn't normal. He'd felt that delay with his own hands when he worked on the control cables, that tiny bit of slack in the system. He started paying attention to the sound the cables made when he tensioned them during maintenance. There was a specific tone, a sort of low twang when you plucked them, like a guitar string. Loose cables sounded different than tight cables. McKenna could hear the difference. Every P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose. Within spec, but loose. He mentioned this to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison died. Rodriguez asked what could be done about it. McKenna said, "Nothing official. But unofficially, there's a solution. It just requires breaking regulations that could get us both court-martialed." The problem wasn't that American pilots didn't know what to do. They knew. Every briefing emphasized it. Every training flight drilled it into their heads until they could recite it in their sleep. Never turn with a zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Hit and run. The doctrine was clear. The problem was that combat didn't follow doctrine. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old. Farm kid from Iowa. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Looked like he should be driving a tractor, not a fighter plane. He'd flown 6 combat missions and had 0 kills. Not because he was a bad pilot. Because he followed the rules. And the rules kept putting him in positions where he couldn't get a shot. Couldn't make a difference. Couldn't survive. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dove on a 0 from altitude, built up speed to 400 miles per hour. Came in from the sun, exactly like the manual said. Got the 0 square in his gun sight. Started to pull lead for deflection. The 0 snap-rolled left and dove. Hayes tried to follow. His P-38 rolled into the turn, but it felt like moving through mud, through molasses. By the time his aircraft pointed where he wanted it, the 0 was gone. Hayes pulled out, climbed back to altitude. Not a single shot fired. 4th mission was worse. Hayes and his wingman jumped 2 zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes got the first burst off, missed. The 0 reversed hard right. Hayes rolled to follow, and his wingman called out 2 more zeros diving from above. Hayes tried to roll back level and dive away. The airplane responded, but slowly. Just slowly enough that one of the diving zeros got a 3-second burst into Hayes's right boom. 20mm cannon shells. They didn't penetrate, but they scared Hayes badly enough that he broke off the engagement and ran for home with both engines smoking. 5th mission. Hayes watched his wingman die. The wingman's name was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years old, from Boston. They'd gone through training together, bunked together, told each other stories about girls back home who were probably writing letters to other guys by now. On August 14th, Parker got separated from the formation during a dogfight over Finschhafen. 2 zeros got on his tail. Parker tried everything. Rolled hard, reversed, tried to scissor. The zeros stayed with him through every maneuver, like they were attached by invisible wire. Hayes heard Parker on the radio calling for help, heard the panic in his voice, heard him say his airplane wasn't turning fast enough, heard the gunfire, heard Parker scream, then nothing. Hayes didn't sleep that night. Neither did most of the squadron. Parker's bed stayed empty. His personal effects got packed up and shipped home to parents, who would never stop crying. His P-38 was written off as combat loss. The maintenance log noted no mechanical issues. The official cause was pilot error during defensive maneuvering. Pilot error. McKenna had worked on Parker's aircraft the morning he died. Everything was perfect. Engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension within spec. The airplane was fine, but Parker was dead anyway, and McKenna knew why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls. That tiny bit of slack that the manual said was acceptable. It had killed Parker just like it had killed Morrison and Chen and 14 others. The worst part was the smell. Every morning, McKenna worked in the maintenance area, and the smell of aviation fuel and hot metal and hydraulic fluid filled his nose. It was the smell of aircraft preparing for combat. Some of those aircraft would come back, some wouldn't, and McKenna would be there the next morning, smelling the same smells, working on more aircraft, watching more pilots walk out to machines that couldn't respond fast enough to keep them alive. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes came to the maintenance area, found McKenna working on his assigned P-38. Hayes asked if there was anything at all, McKenna could do to make the airplane roll faster. Hayes said he didn't care if it was regulation or not. He didn't care if it was legal. He didn't care if it was safe. He just wanted a chance. McKenna looked at Hayes, saw the fear in his eyes, saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew, absolutely knew, he was going to die if something didn't change. McKenna told Hayes to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air smelled like engine oil and tropical humidity. He pulled the inspection panel off Hayes's P-38 left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled, felt the slack, maybe 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension. Caught, his hands were covered in grease. His fingers ached from a full day of maintenance work. But he could feel that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from a salvaged P-38 that had ground-looped 2 weeks earlier. The aircraft was scrap, but McKenna had pulled useful parts before it went to the depot, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag without really knowing why. Now he knew. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, bent it into a Z shape. The wire was stiff, fought back against the pliers. His hand slipped twice, cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. Took him 8 minutes to get the bend exactly. Right, the Z shape would act as an inline tensioner, would add just enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept moving. Shadows jumped across the cable system, his shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin, dropped it, heard it bounce somewhere in the darkness of the boom, spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time, his heart was pounding like a drum. If the engineering officer found him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, maybe prison time. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire and his hands, walked out of the hangar at 01:55. The tropical night was humid and still. Somewhere in the distance, he heard aircraft engines, Japanese night raiders probably. The sound made his stomach clench. He'd just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash, and McKenna would be responsible. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna went to his bunk, didn't sleep, watched the ceiling until dawn. At 06:30, he walked to the flight line, watched the crew fuel and arm Hayes's aircraft, watched Hayes walk out for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 07:42, Hayes took off. McKenna stood on the flight line and watched the P-38 climb into the morning sky, watched it join formation with 16 other aircraft, watched them head northwest toward Japanese airspace, and then all he could do was wait. The engagement started at Zoo 814. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The morning sun was behind them. Perfect setup for a diving attack. Hayes was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a 0 at the back of the formation. Due from altitude. Built speed to 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger in his gun sight. Hayes could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage. Could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. The 450 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon hammered. Tracers reached out like fingers of fire. Most missed. A few hits sparked off the 0's wing. Not enough. The 0 snap-rolled right and dove. Hayes rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay. No lag. The stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never felt his P-38 move like that. It was like the airplane had been waiting for his command and executed it the split second he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time. Got his nose down. The 0 was right there in his sight picture. He fired again. 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the 0's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The 0's engine exploded. Pieces flew off in every direction. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke like a funeral shroud. Hayes's first kill. But there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out 0's diving from above. Hayes looked up, saw 3 of them coming down in a shallow dive. Coming fast. They'd seen him shoot down their friend. Now they wanted revenge. Hayes shoved the throttles forward. Started to climb, but the 0's were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing. Keep running. That was the doctrine. That was survival. But doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left, pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead 0. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Hayes to reverse that fast. The 0 was in a bad position, exposed. Hayes pulled lead, fired, hit the 0 in the left wing root. The wing folded. The 0 tumbled out of the sky like a broken toy. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 0's tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Classic defensive maneuver. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly. No delay, no fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. It was like flying a completely different aircraft, like someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 1 0 made a mistake. Reversed too hard, bled too much speed. Hayes got inside his turn. Close range, maybe 200 feet. He fired, couldn't miss. The 0 came apart. Pieces of aircraft fell past Hayes's canopy. He felt the P-38 shudder as debris hit his right boom. 3 kills. The 4th 0 ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, reformed with what was left of his flight. They headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes, when Hayes landed at Doa Darura at 0903. McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines, climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna, said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Hayes's engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. Experienced, smart. He'd been watching Hayes's element engage the 0's below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes's P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should, like it was defying physics. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, knew their skill levels. Hayes was good, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still amped up on adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Hayes said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today, faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Hayes's airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment, then told him everything. The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to his aircraft. McKenna said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38, same piano wire tensioner, same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning, came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna he wanted the modification too. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron like wildfire. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try. McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner. Takes 8 minutes, changes everything. The modifications spread. Pilot to pilot, mechanic to mechanic, no official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Hayes shot down 2 more zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 on August 25th. The pilots started coming back from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Guinea. He heard about the modification from a pilot who'd transferred from Dodorura. Watkins was skeptical, but he tried it on 1 aircraft. The pilot came back from the next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing it too. By early September, maybe 40 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dodorura noticed something was different, but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew, the mechanics knew, nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every 0 destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed, but officially nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. 64 confirmed kills. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Classic maneuver. He'd done it dozens of times, except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver against P-38s more times than he could count. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, knew the timing perfectly, but this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away, using full throttle, burning fuel he couldn't afford to waste. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics, hit and run, boom and zoom, but their aircraft were responding faster, fractionally, but enough to matter, enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom. A 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment, even if they'd found it. They might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system, wasn't a new engine, just a minor modification to control cable tension, but that minor modification was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew, absolutely knew, they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics would work. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to get into turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms, and the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, could take more damage. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster. Several experienced Japanese pilots were killed in September, trying tactics that had worked perfectly in July. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew something had changed, but they didn't know what, and they couldn't figure out how to counter it. You can't develop tactics against a modification you don't know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at better than a 1-to-1 rate. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage. That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943, when a maintenance inspector at Doa-Dorura noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners. wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations, but it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question wasn't whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who'd installed it without authorization, or quietly approve it after the fact. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion was that the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943, but McKenna never received official credit, no commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to engineering. Analysis: McKenna's name didn't appear anywhere. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, worked as a crop duster for 37 years. He never forgot what McKenna had done. Every year on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, shot down 16 aircraft. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force, retired as a colonel in 1963. He told the story of McKenna's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, went back to working on cars, opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for 42 years, never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic, fixed airplanes. That's all. In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the piano wire. Tensiona in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down McKenna through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. McKenna confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives, based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. McKenna said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, the others. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner, did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew, did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there. Different owner now, but on the wall in the back office, there's a faded photograph, a young mechanic in coveralls, standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943. New Guinea. That's how innovation actually happens in war, not through official channels or engineering committees, through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered, and we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.